Hello everyone, thank you for joining today's webinar, 6 Practical Reasons to Monitor Your Log Data. My name is Andrea Ruane and I am a sales tech here at Nagios. And the goal of today's webinar is that you will leave with an understanding of the various ways you can use a log monitoring solution in your environment. That way you can start to think about how to use these powerful options in your organization. And these ideas can help save you time and money. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about. First, I'll be giving a quick overview of Nagios Log Server. And then second, I will be discussing 6 different practical reasons to use a log monitoring solution in your environment. And last, I'll cover integrating Nagios XI with Nagios Log Server, Nagios XI is our general network infrastructure monitoring tool. And then if you have any questions at any point today, please write them down in that question section. And if we don't get to your question, someone will follow up with an email afterwards. And at various points during the webinar, I will be asking you, the audience, questions, and you are able to participate in this by writing your answer in the questions section. And the webinar will be recorded. We will send out a link to the recording afterwards. The email that contains that link will also contain links to helpful information related to the topics that I cover today. So first, I'll give that quick overview of Nagios Log Server before I get into the 6 practical reasons to use a log monitoring solution. But first, it's time for an audience question. It's the first one of the day. Are you currently using log monitoring software? And if so, how many solutions are you using? I would love for you to participate and share your answer. And you can, again, write that answer down in the questions section. So I'll give people a moment to respond. All right, thanks everyone. So I am seeing a lot of people saying that they're not using a log monitoring solution, and then some people are using one solution that intakes all of their log sources. And then what else do we have here? So some of you are using multiple log monitoring programs and then looking at the log data in those programs individually. So thank you for participating, everybody. And then next we have another question. Question time is not over yet. So everyone in the audience, let us know if you are using a log monitoring solution. What is the reason that you chose to monitor your organization's logs? And you can write that answer in the question section, just like last time. And I'll give you all a moment to let those answers come in. So a lot of people are saying yes, they are using a log monitoring solution for troubleshooting purposes to see, what led up to an event. And then we have some people are storing their logs. Yes, they're storing them for a certain amount of months or years because for their industry, they have a regulatory requirement to store those logs for a certain time period. And then other people are saying they want to see their logs data in one place. Perfect. And then, I see a few other miscellaneous answers as well. Thank you all. So let's talk about first, before we get into the log monitoring capabilities of Log Server, let's talk about what's available for log monitoring in Nagios XI. So for those of you not familiar with Nagios XI, that is our enterprise IT infrastructure monitoring tool, and it's used for general network monitoring for all kinds of hosts and devices. If something runs on electricity, there's probably going to be a way to monitor it with Nagios XI. So Nagios XI, log monitoring there is effective, but it's very rudimentary. It's basic, it's simple. So one way you could do log monitoring in Nagios XI is that you could create an XI plugin to scan a given log file to look for a specific error, or maybe the number of errors in the last certain number of minutes, something like that. All of the log data remains on the host that's being monitored, and running more complex queries that involve more than one host is not very feasible. And in Nagios XI, there's something called configuration wizards. So these wizards are great because they allow you to quickly and easily get a host monitored in your environment with just a few clicks. And so there's a wizard available in Nagios XI related to monitoring logs. And it's this one that you see here that I have a screenshot for here. It's called the Windows Event Log Monitoring Wizard. So here on the screen, you can see some of the options available for monitoring in this wizard. And again, like I mentioned earlier, log monitoring is rudimentary within Nagios XI. So what is Log Server? So it's a central log collection and analysis platform. It allows you to collect, store, analyze all of your log data from one convenient location. It can receive virtually any type of log data. And here in this screenshot, you can see some of the instructions we have for each type of log data that you can import. And if you don't see the log source mentioned here, you can still import it. It just might take a little bit of work on your end, but we can definitely accept it. We can accept anything text-based. We could parse a cookbook if you wanted, if you had a text file of that. So after collecting your log data, Log Server will store it in a central location where you can easily search it, filter, and query your data at any time. And then based on the data you find important, you could be notified via alerts and create dashboards to better visualize your data. And Log Server is built upon the ELK stack. And so here's a screenshot that shows some of the really cool dashboard type creations that you can make in Log Server to look at your log data and analyze it. And true to our beliefs, our strengths, our success stories with Nagios XI, Log Server was created to extend monitoring, alerting, and insight to even more of your IT world. So there's very similar themes between XI and Log Server. So XI, it can monitor virtually anything on a network. Log Server can accept log data from virtually anything on a network. And then Nagios XI, it can speak many different languages and scripts. And Nagios Log Server, it can accept log types of virtually anything. And then just like how Nagios XI provides data and proof that something is happening on your network, Log Server also is that job saver for you. And so when you think about using Log Server, you might be asking, why not just build my own syslog server on my own? It's free to do that. So what I would say to that is, yes, they are free if you want to make your own homemade one, but that is if you are assuming that your time is not worth something. But you know that your time is very valuable, and Log Server's goal is to get you set up and get you collecting logs, organizing them, and querying them as fast as humanly possible. And when you set up your own syslog server, a homemade one, there's various pitfalls and problems that you can experience when doing that. So without proper configuration, if you create your own syslog server, your log data gets placed into a single log file with no organization, no rhyme or reason as to which system it actually came from. And then another challenging thing is that searching the log data, in theory, it can be pretty fast, but that's if you're proficient with grep and regular expressions. And then as far as how you would go about scaling a homemade log server, a syslog server, I'm not even sure how you would do that. So you would need to really make sure you build it right the first time, or you could run into big problems when you start trying to scale. And then now I'll talk about 6 real-life use cases where you should consider monitoring your logs. So log monitoring, it's an essential part of monitoring your infrastructure. A general network monitoring tool such as Nagios XI, it can tell you when a host or service is having a problem. A log solution, it's a very important tool that can tell you what events happened before that problem occurred. So Log Server is like a tool in your detective kit to help you understand what caused a problem. And when a problem occurs in a network, one of the first things someone on an organization's IT team is going to do is look at that log data of what happened before that issue occurred. So I'll give an example of how this might look in real life, and I drew this little diagram here with clip art to help explain what I'm going to talk about. So let's pretend that someone is monitoring with Nagios XI and a server crash happens. So XI is going to tell you that the crash happened, and it might give you some other metrics about that server, and then depending on how you set it up. So then let's pretend that this server is connected to a third-party application that it's sending to. So this little symbol here is my server. Here's the connection to that third-party application that it's sending its data to, this little cloud application. And I put an X through this to say that that connection got broken somehow. We're not sure how it broke, but it is. So if that third-party application connection is broken, the server will start storing data internally that it is trying to send. And the amount of stored data in this example, it's eventually going to reach and go past capacity. So then this server will crash because of this. And as you all know, in this case, due to the nature of the problem, simply restarting the server, that basic first troubleshooting step, it's not going to fix the problem in this example. So if the system administrator has the log data, they can see the events that happened before the server crashed. So they might see a log referring to something going wrong with this connection here, and it's going to help them troubleshoot the problem. So it may help them realize that they need to repair this connection here to the third-party application. And if they were monitoring the server disk space with Nagios XI, they would have had the additional data that showed the space was filling up on the server before the crash. They might have been able to go into action before the crash occurred to help fix that issue if they had seen that data from XI too. So I'll give a second example. So this time it's yet another server crash, and I drew another fancy diagram. So in this example, let's talk about the server crashing because the server overheated. So it's in a server room and something goes wrong with the fan. Here's my fan symbol. It's red because it's broken. Something is wrong with the air conditioning. And then I have this little temperature symbol here symbolizing that the temperature is getting too high. So the log data for the power supply and the internal fan and the air conditioning, if you have any temperature sensors or any thermostats, any Internet of Things devices that are monitoring the conditions of the room, that can be set up to go to Log Server if the manufacturer makes it available. So Log Server can receive all that kind of data, and if a system administrator has this kind of data, they might have been able to see that room temperature increasing before the server crashed. That could help them determine that the cause of the server crash was an external factor, that this room temperature got too hot. And if they were monitoring the thermostat with Nagios XI, they could have set up to receive a notification if the temperature was too high, and that could have stopped this problem in the first place if they were able to implement a fix before their server crashed. They could have brought in a portable fan or an air conditioning unit to help temporarily bring the temperature down until the air conditioning got fixed. So next audience question: how long is your organization required to store its log data? And again, as a reminder, you can write your answer in the question section. I'll give everybody a moment here to let us know what their answers are in the chat. So I'm seeing that some of you are not required to store your log data for a certain amount of time. And then some of you are bound to a regulatory requirement to keep the data for up to a few years. And then some of you are holding onto your data, it looks like here, for a certain amount of time. More is like a best practice, even though it's not required for your specific industry or situation. So thanks everyone for participating. It's really interesting to see all the responses that you're sending in. So another reason companies large and small alike are using Log Server is in order to help them meet their regulatory requirements in regards to data retention time periods. So that's a very practical use of having a Log Server solution. So many industries such as military, financial, government, healthcare, and more may have regulatory requirements about how long they must retain data. And depending on your industry, it could be 90 days or it could be up to several years. And owning Log Server, as a note, will not automatically make you compliant, but it is one step in the direction of becoming compliant with log retention requirements in your industry. And then one huge benefit of Log Server is that you are not charged by how much data you're sending or how long you retain it. Many solutions do charge you on the amount of data or how long you're retaining it. And if they're charging you based on that, it can become very expensive very quickly to store a significant amount of log data. So Log Server, let's talk a little bit about the architecture here. It's licensed based on the number of cluster instances you want to implement in your environment. So here is in my example diagram of a cluster. So there are 4 Log Server instances on my cluster. So each instance goes on its own little server, and having 2 or more instances in your Log Server allows you to balance server load. It gives you data redundancy as well as high availability, and allows you to scale Log Server to meet the needs of your environment. And again, unlike other log monitoring platforms, Nagios does not charge based on the number of hosts or the amount of data that Log Server collects. You can send as much log data to Log Server as your servers can handle and query quickly, and then and how much they can archive and alert based on how much data you have. So I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. But before I mention that, one thing that is also great about Log Server is that it's not a public cloud solution. So with a public cloud solution, you are sending your log data outside of your organization. But with Log Server, you get to keep your data. We at Nagios do not receive your log data. So you get to keep it, and you get to make it as secure as you want. So another example of where you might want to keep your log data a certain amount of time to meet requirements per regulation is the healthcare industry. So hospitals can use a log monitoring solution to monitor employee logins. So you can set it up so that your logs of which nurse or doctor logged in, which patient they saw, and the time that these things happened are sent to your log repository. You can set up alerts to see if someone was logging into a computer that they were not supposed to. You can see if someone was modifying a medication that they were not supposed to as well. And in order to store this data, you just need to make sure that your hardware is adequate to log that amount of data. And if you don't have a regulatory requirement, which some of you may not have, you have to decide, you have to make a judgment call on how long it makes sense to retain your log data for. So you can go with like a general recommendation that's out there. You have to think about your organization's unique situation, and if it makes sense to keep your data for a longer or shorter amount of time. And then one idea I wanted to share with you that's something worth thinking about for how long to keep your data is, what is the average time until hackers are typically detected within an organization if they hack into your system? How many months is that? How many days is that? So whatever that statistic is, like let's say if you discover hackers are present on your network, you're going to want to have log data as far back as they've been on your system. So however many months that statistic is, it's a good idea to consider that in your calculations of how long you want to keep your log data, so that you have data going all the way back to when a hacker first got onto your system. And then to give another example, let's talk about the financial industry. So think about banks. It's extremely important to keep logs if you're in that sector. There's so much at stake. It's important to have records of who is logging into where, what they're accessing, and what are they changing. And the logs can give you information about if someone was doing something that they were not supposed to be doing. And then for the healthcare and financial industries I mentioned, and many others, it's extremely important to mention or to ensure that your log data is secure. So perhaps you're not allowed to send the data outside of your particular hospital, for example, no matter how secure a service provider says it will be. So you might not want to send in that if you are bound to, if you have a requirement like that, you might not want to send your log data to Google Cloud or any of those other big name cloud providers, for example. Nagios Log Server allows you to store your data where you want and make it as secure as you want. Nagios XI, it's not cloud hosted and it's not a SaaS solution. We don't store your log data. You store your log data. And that can be a tremendous benefit because you get to make it as secure as you want. It is super important for your IT workflow efficiency to consolidate the number of software programs you are using in your job. For your logs, you can consolidate by having one software program to handle all of your logs. This will reduce the amount of programs that your team will need to learn, manage, and log into. Log Server can be used as that central repository, and without that repository, some of your logs may exist in some places and others will exist in other places. If you have multiple types of technology in your office, you may find yourself looking at the Cisco interface for Cisco logs, and then looking at the HP log program for your HP logs, and so on. Log Server is not a Linux only or a Windows only or a networking equipment only log solution. It can accept all log types. That way, when you go to query your logs or use your logs to troubleshoot a problem, you only have to go into Log Server. This saves you from having to open multiple different programs and piece everything together manually. So next question. Everyone in the audience, it's time to share your answers again. So are you currently using a SIEM solution? So SIEM stands for Security, Information, and Event Management, and I would love for you to participate. You can write your answer again in the question section, and I'll give everybody a moment here. Thanks for your responses. Okay, so the answers that I'm seeing here, they are mixed. So I'm seeing some people saying they are using a SIEM, and then some people are not using a SIEM. Thanks for participating. So someone had asked a question on the registration form for the webinar. Their question was, from a security perspective, how can I query my logs for security events? What are some threat hunting tactics? And this next section of the webinar, we'll talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about SIEM software solutions. So although Log Server is not a SIEM solution, one component of many SIEMs is log collection. So Log Server, it could be used as the log collection part of a homemade SIEM solution if you decide to piece together various types of solutions to create your own homemade SIEM. SIEM solutions are very expensive out of the box if you obtain one already made. They're sometimes offered at up to hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on the solution. So that's why making your own SIEM can be an attractive option, because in theory it could save you a lot of money. And then another practical way to use a log solution is for monitoring for failed login attempts. So this can be an indication that a security event might be happening. So you can set up alerts on query results that may indicate that this issue is happening. So a big example of this is setting up Log Server to alert you about things like the amount of failed logins or failed password attempts that have occurred over a certain amount of time. And I'll give you a real life example of this. So Nagios Log Server, it was introduced at the Nagios World Conference several years ago, and to celebrate the release of Log Server, we gave away a free copy of Log Server to the conference attendees. After the conference, one of the attendees installed and set up Log Server at their organization, and they did this on a Friday. And then when they went home for the weekend, and then when they came back on Monday to the office, they found that there had been thousands of failed login attempts over the weekend. And so it looked like there was some sort of attack happening to try to hack into their system. And if they hadn't installed Log Server and set it up to alert on this type of query of failed logins, they wouldn't have known about this possible hacking attempt. So what they were able to do was they were able to resolve the problem by blocking the IP address that the failed logins were coming from. Another example of a query that you can create in Log Server is to look for 404 errors. You could also look for any other type of error. Let's pretend that your organization has a group of web servers for your website. You can set them up to all send their log data to Log Server. You can then set up a query to be alerted if there is an overall increase in 404 errors in that group of servers. If your customers are getting 404 errors when accessing your website, it looks bad for your organization. It can cause a loss of customer trust in the service that is being provided. And if your website is unavailable and people are using the website to buy your products, 404 errors can lead to a direct loss in revenue. Someone on the registration form for the webinar had mentioned that they're interested in learning about and building dashboards. So I'll send out documentation in the follow-up email with more information about creating dashboards. And also, the first place I would go to if you're looking for some dashboards for Log Server, you can go to the Nagios Exchange here. You can see this screenshot here. And right where I'm pointing at there, that's where people have shared Log Server dashboards that they've created and that you can test out and use. So the Nagios Exchange is where other IT professionals, your peers, have shared plugins that they've created for Nagios products. Most of them are plugins for, the plugins are for Nagios XI, but people have shared dashboards that they've created. And so here is a screenshot of some of the search results for those dashboards. One that I really like is this Better Apache dashboard. And I can show you a screenshot of that on the next screen. So here you can see a bunch of data, and a lot of it is like geographically located, which is really nice. And then another example of how you might want to query your log data, an example of dashboards and queries that's very valuable. It's related to Google Analytics type information. So why reinvent the wheel? Why use Log Server to get that kind of data and put it into dashboards? So basically, why not use Google Analytics or a similar solution instead of using a log monitoring solution? This is because if your customers have ad blockers, you're not able to see as much information about what they accessed on your website if you're using like a Google Analytics instead of looking at the log data. And there is a high percentage of adoption rate of ad blockers each year. So many of you have ad blockers installed on employee computers at your organization as a standard practice. So if you're using website analytics, if you're those types of programs, if your customers have ad blockers installed, they stop the website analytics solution from seeing the full truth about your customers. You will not see full visibility about who is interacting with your website and how they're interacting with your website. So if you look at website analytics type information with a log solution, however, instead of a website analytics solution, if you set it up right, you can see everything that someone clicked on a website. These ad blockers will not affect the log data you receive about the website. You will have the full information if you use Log Server and set it up correctly. If you use a standard web analytics tool and not Log Server, the ad blockers will prevent you from seeing all of the data. And another thing you can do with queries is that you can set the types of alerts received based on the analytics you're interested in. Maybe you want to receive an alert based on how many times a certain search term was used on your website. You could monitor the website for really valuable customer and marketing intelligence using Log Server. And then you could also monitor it with XI at the same time. So in XI, you could be alerted about things like website defacement or website availability or your SSL certificate expiration. You could even create alerts in Log Server for any of the standard 400 or 500 website error codes. And next, I'll talk a little bit about integrating with Log Server and Nagios XI. So Log Server does integrate with XI. This integration allows you to be alerted straight from Nagios XI based on queries that you created in Log Server. You can create your own queries in XI from or of the log server log data. And we make it easy to integrate these programs through using this log server wizard that I am pointing to right here. And another point of integration that log server allows you is to send alerts to Nagios XI via NRDP. So NRDP stands for Nagios Remote Data Processor. And as a side note, log server has multiple ways of sending alerts. The other options for sending alerts are email, SNMP traps, and scripts. And that is all the time we have for today. So I encourage you to think about how you can apply the log monitoring features that you learned about today in your monitored environment. Thank you everyone for attending the webinar, and have a great rest of your day.